Our next guest calls the most dovish central bank on earth, decided to give us free money till the end of 2014 last week. And for some reason, traders were surprised, driving up assets all across the world. He's Peter Schiff with Euro Pacific Capital. Peter, this low rates for infinity really hurts long-term borrowers, it hurts debt holders, basically the old people who live off this type of interest. How can they make money?
Absolutely, but it also fundamentally hurts the U.S. economy because it prevents it from restructuring. See, the Federal Reserve doesn't care about the long-term health of the economy. It just wants to keep the music going until the next election. You know, if you remember,
but wait a minute, the Fed is apolitical. The Fed, they're not elected. They're supposed to be apolitical. Bernanke, I don't know why anyone would want that job for another term. Is this really just all about politics? And wasn't 2013 as a deadline for free money sufficient to get us through the election cycle?
Well, you would have thought, but we're so addicted to it that we need it in perpetuity. And the Fed is very political. That's the problem. You know, if you remember the housing bubble, had the Fed raised interest rates more aggressively in 2002, 2003, 2004, we would have had a bursting of that bubble much sooner than 2008, and it wouldn't have done nearly as much damage. But the Fed didn't want to upset that apple cart. It knew that we had a housing bubble, but rather than prick it, it wanted to nurture it because it was good politics. And they did that, made that mistake, and now they're doing the same thing again. The Fed knows that we need higher interest rates to restructure and have a viable recovery, a real economy. But politically, that's dangerous because you bring forward the problem. So the Fed doesn't want to do that. It doesn't want to deal with the consequences of our problems. It wants to postpone them for a later date. But once again, it's simply going to make the crisis much worse because the Fed hesitated, and instead of reining in the reckless government, the Fed enabled the government to act more recklessly by keeping interest rates low so we can keep borrowing more money.
What can we get to get these guys off the dime to start hiking rates and get some reality injected in this economy?
Well, we need a truly independent Federal Reserve, number one, and we need to take away a lot of its powers, and we need to appoint people that understand economics, that understand money and inflation, that have read the U.S. Constitution, because I think the people that are there now, including Ben Bernanke, really are clueless about money, about how it works, about inflation, about where it comes from, about the business cycle, about what causes it. They really believe in this nonsense of Keynesian economics. They think that you can print prosperity, that more government solves problems, and that is the problem. If we can go back to the original intent of the Federal Reserve, or better yet, get rid of it entirely and go back to the original intent of the framers of the Constitution, we'll have sound money and we'll have a much smaller government and therefore a much more prosperous America.
You would think, but again, we get back to the retirees. We get back to folks that almost have to get pushed on the risk spectrum. When you saw those extension of low rates forever, asset classes across the board went up. The Fed is all but begging for people to get out there on the risk side of the curve. Aren't the retirees forced to play part of this game of musical chairs? Aren't people, they're basically forced to put their assets into higher risk type of entities, aren't they, or entities?
Well, they are being forced. Unfortunately, many of them are making the wrong decision. A lot of them are buying longer-term U.S. Treasuries, maybe 30 years to get extra yield. In so doing, they're taking enormous risk. In fact, many of the funds that are out there are actually levering up longer-term debt. That is incredible risk. Other people are buying overpriced stocks. I think what retirees need to understand is that when the dollar is wiped out, all dollar-denominated debt instruments are going to go with it. And so what they need to do is get out of the dollar completely. So retirees need to buy gold and silver. If they want more current income, they need to look towards foreign sources. I particularly like high dividend paying foreign stocks. But if you can't take that risk, you could still buy bonds denominated in foreign currencies. But what you don't want to do is make the mistake of buying long-term U.S. dollar-denominated bonds, because I think the biggest losses in this financial collapse are going to be absorbed by or felt by the bondholders. Even those that are owning U.S. government bonds or municipal bonds, bonds that are thought to be low risk, are still going to get wiped out as the dollar collapses.
And in terms of how they get long bonds from foreign countries in non-U.S. denominated terms, are you talking about a short the euro type of strategy in terms of getting long these things? Most people can't go and get a Swiss franc. They can't go over to Zurich and get themselves some franc and get long. Are you balancing long positions in these companies with shorts in other currencies to kind of benefit from it, or short the dollar?
No, not at all. We're simply buying bonds denominated in other currencies that are obligations of foreign governments or foreign corporations. I mean, they're very easy to buy. You can buy them through funds that invest in these securities. You can buy them directly. And we do both. At my company, Euro Pacific Capital, we create bond portfolios for people where we buy bonds in Swiss francs, Australian dollars, Norwegian kroner, Singapore dollars, Canadian dollars, all sorts of currencies, and both of governments. If you want a AAA credit rating, there are still some governments out there that are AAA. The U.S. is not, at least according to the S&P, but there are still other governments out there that are rated AAA by S&P. You can buy those bonds and have those obligations denominated and paid to you in stronger currencies that are not being printed into oblivion.
All right. Well, the S&P is an entirely other conversation, but we only got time for one right now. He's Peter Schiff with Euro Pacific Capital. He says go over there instead of saying in the U.S., and over there he means pretty much the rest of the world. Hey, thanks so much for joining us.
Sure.